There's a lot of news this afternoon. I want to cover three things. Two great, one potentially very, very bad. Great thing number one, Donald Trump went to North Carolina. He is en route to California. He has visited with and has made pledges to the victims of the North Carolina hurricanes who were forgotten and abandoned by FEMA for many, many months. Good. He's en route to California. It is reported, but I have not confirmed, that he will tell Governor Newsom, I'll get you aid, but you got to do two things. Got to fix your water system and ignore the Chinook salmon and the Delta smelt and get water down to Southern California and the Central Valley, and you have to fix your voting system. Both are legitimate acts of a dysfunctional state. If they do not fix the water system, they will never fix the firefighting system. And if they do not stop putting fish in front of people, we will not prosper as a country. Now, I lived in California unbroken, 1989 to 2016, moved back to the Beltway then. I come back every other year to teach, and it's get worse every other year. Secondly, fix the voting system. We stopped voting, allegedly, on November 5. It took 38 days for California to actually certify its vote. It's a mess. It's an absolute mess. It is open to abuse. It has almost certainly got fraud in it. I can't prove that. But it is simply the case that if you allow, quote, curing of ballot defects for as many days as California does, bad things are going to happen to good elections. And so Trump has said, fix the elections and the water, we'll get the money. That is terrific. If Gavin turns them down, I hope the president makes available on a case-by-case basis relief to those homeowners who were not insured and leaves California's government to its epic dysfunction. So two good things out of Donald Trump today. One good visits. One big thing. Second good thing. Vice President Vance went to the March for Life. I salute you, Vice President Vance. Thank you. Showing up in person, giving the message, standing with the people who believe in protecting life. Thank you. Very potentially bad thing. For whatever reason and by whoever's decision, it is being reported that Secret Service protection has been withdrawn not just from John Bolton, but from former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and former Special Envoy Brian Hook. Now, I always thought it was odd what happened in the Biden years. They pulled Secret Service protection from Ambassador Robert O'Brien, the national security advisor who had been threatened by Iran. And they kept it for John Bolton. John Bolton had left the United States government when the decision was made by President Trump to kill Khamenei. Not Khamenei, Soleimani. Khamenei got mad because Soleimani was his bro. And Soleimani was a strategic threat to the United States. It was an excellent decision by President Trump in his first term. But other people in the room have been threatened by Iranian state actors since then, including, of course, Secretary Pompeo, Ambassador O'Brien, Ambassador Bolton, and Special Envoy Hook. There are others. We need to protect those people. Iran is a malevolent, evil regime. And it makes no sense to pull the protection from people. Now, I don't know why John Bolton was on the list to begin with, but the Iranians aren't really bright. They're just evil. So he might have been. If the FBI briefs or the CIA concludes that active threats are still underway, and I have to think they are, the Iranians never give up. They're not very good at what they do, but they never give up. Not the Iranian people, the Iranian government. That is a potentially disastrous decision. On a personal level, Mike Pompeo is my friend. Robert O'Brien is my friend. I've met Brian Hook a number of times. I don't consider him a friend, but on a personal level, it would be a disaster. But on a political level, it would have terrible consequences. It would make Donald Trump look weak. It would make Donald Trump appear to be unpatriotic. I don't know what the decision-making is. I'm not even sure it's true. I have calls out, haven't heard anything back yet, just got reports. Hope it's not true. I'll brief you that on Monday as I do my investigation. Let me tell you, though, I want to begin today as a sort of pickup. If you missed yesterday, when I explained how Donald Trump is the Rosetta Stone for American politics for the past 10 years, and at least for the next 4 and probably for the next 10, you need to go and listen on the YouTube channel, Hugh Hewitt YouTube, to the Rosetta Stone monologue and then the interview of Josh Holmes from Ruthless Podcast. Now I want to talk, I didn't cover that. I covered the Republicans, the Democrats, and media, both legacy media, old alternative media, talk radio, Fox News, and new alternative media, podcasting, Ben Shapiro's Daily Wire, my podcast, Highly Concentrated Hugh, Dwayne's podcast, Dwayne's World, my X account, everything. You can find that at my YouTube channel. There's a brand new alternative media rising, and it's fabulous. It's terrific. And Donald Trump has changed every one of those things. I explained it yesterday, but I did not have time to address the TDS folks who suffer from Trump derangement syndrome. By the way, they're on the right and they're on the left. Some people on the right love Donald Trump too much, to the exclusion of concern for their family, friends, and communities. It's great to be in politics. I've been in politics my whole life, but I've always been first God, then spouse, then children, then the country. That's the order. And that should be, I hope, your order. And I get involved in politics, and I suffer when my people lose. I really hate it. No, we have to lose. Democracy. If you bat 500, you're doing well in a democracy, in a democratic republic that we have. But I am guided by the C.S. Lewis admonition in The Weight of Glory. My favorite quote, I have it in front of me so I get it exactly right. There are no ordinary people. You have never talked to a mere mortal. Nations, cultures, arts, civilizations, these are mortal, and their life is to ours as the life of a gnat. But it is immortals whom we joke with, marry, snub, and exploit, immortal horrors or everlasting splendors. This does not mean that we are to be perpetually solemn. We must play. But our merriment must be that of the kind, it is in fact the merriest kind, which exists between people who have, from the outset, taking each other seriously. No flippancy, no superiority, no presumption. And I try and live that out. Now, a lot of people in my life are on both ends of the TDS spectrum. And I just did a podcast with Donnie Deutsch. And I've known Donnie, 15 years. And Donnie and I don't agree on much. Had a great conversation. And he asked me, what do I tell my people who are afraid of Trump? I said, don't tell him what you know. He's a Manhattan developer, not a right-wing nut. And the first term was taken off the rails by Russia. It was a lie. And he doesn't forget that. But he's a Manhattan. He's Nelson Rockefeller without the art collection, got golf courses instead. He's a common sense conservative driving an agenda that is great for this country and for the world and for our allies. But, as I'll talk with Matt Continetti and Ben Domenech, he's making us fundamentally reassess some issues on the international stage, and that's a good thing. Some people can't get through a day without a dose of outrage about Donald Trump. They are addicted to outrage about Donald Trump. And they're in my life. They're in everyone's life. Some people have cut me off or cannot not bring up Trump, cannot not hate on him, cannot not try and spark a debate they cannot beat me at because there's nobody who can beat me at a debate. For example, on the Constitution or about Donald Trump's executive orders, you can't beat me. You're not going to persuade me, but they're not open to being taught. I'm a professor. I don't cut anyone off, but some people have cut me off. That's fine. I am open, and I hope you are open to anyone who writes you a note and says, hey, been a while, let's have lunch. No politics, let's just catch up. Absolutely take people up on that. To your friends who are obsessed with gotchas and 100 lashes on lefties, tell them to just ease off the brake. Things are going great. Country's going to be great. We are in the golden age. I really believe that. Just tell them to relax, wait and watch. There aren't going to be any ambushes like Brennan, Comey, and Clapper did to Donald Trump before he became president the first time. There's not going to be a Russia. He has learned a lot about how the cats in D.C. operate. He's got a lot more knowledge, a learning machine. And the learning machine has an agenda. I'm not going to agree with all of it. I'm not. For example, if Trump made this decision about Secretary Pompeo, I'm going to disagree with that loudly and longly. Dangerous for him, dangerous for the country. Dangerous for Iran, actually. You know what we have to do if Iran were to actually succeed in killing one of our high-profile people? We would have to bomb the living daylights out of Iran. That is what Bill Clinton did when they threatened, or Saddam threatened, George H.W. Bush. So, dial it back with everyone and put politics where it belongs. Important, but not dispositive of the quality of your life. And just let it go. If you're angry or way too happy, just let it go. Focus on that C.S. Lewis question. Focus on God first every day, and then be serene. And if you can't do that, you need help. At least watch Shrinking, which is not R-rated. It's NC-17 rated. But watch Shrinking, right? Watch that. Maybe you'll go get some help, because you need help if you hate Donald Trump too much. You hate him at all, actually, because it's about politics, it's not about life. I think it helps people with the sort of problems like hypervigilance. And I'd never heard of hypervigilance before. I know about PTS because I've done the Semper Fi Fun Show, and now the America's Fun Show, and now the Fun Show for 22 years, every Veterans Day and Memorial Day. So I know about some of trauma in people's life and how therapy helps. But I've never seen really inside of a therapist practice. I don't know if it's real. It's not my deal. But it might help people. And I like that. I like that a lot. Now, let me get to some hard stuff. AmericanFederal.com. There are gold people. You call 800-221-7694. I bought gold from them this year. Talked to Nick Grovich. Got a price on that day that included his commission. And he'll do the same with you. You call him on day X. He said, well, if you got it here today, you wire me the money, it's going to cost X. Right now, gold is at this very moment, and it could change, right? Because gold trades up and down, sometimes dramatically. Gold's at $2,781. $2,781 an ounce. Meanwhile, the market's decided to take a vacation today after celebrating for 4 days. They got a hangover. And NASDAQ is off almost 0.75 of a point, half point for Dow, half point for S&P percentage-wise. Gold is up. Markets are down. Gold is a hedge against inflation. Looks like a bet to me that the markets are, that President Trump's going to spend what he needs to spend to rebuild the military and to cut the taxes he promised and to rebuild the border. Marines are at the border today, by the way. Great video. The video is worth a gazillion views. It's so much of a budget enhancer for Homeland Security. But gold looks pretty stable to me. If you want some, AmericanFederal.com, 800-221-7694. Next, I want to talk about myPhDweightloss.com, which is, of course, endorsed by Generalissimo because he lost 50 pounds over 4 months and has kept it off, or most of it, for 2 years. And Generalissimo, I want to compliment you on Dwayne's World today, really, except for one thing.
Except for what?
Well, A, I want to say I love the fact I hadn't heard President Trump say all things will be revealed.
Yes.
And you played that clip in the new Dwayne's World, the great podcast.
Yes.
And I wish you'd given me that clip yesterday.
It's on your cut sheet. It's cut
today, but you used it first.
It was. He said it after we finished yesterday.
I get first dibs on it, but that's not really my only complaint. That's actually, it's a very good podcast today. It's beautiful. I listened to it going up the Implacable Hill. You didn't mention me until 3:05 in the podcast.
I got my homework in.
3:05 in the podcast. Not that I'm watching every time I'm listening, but
for crimity's sake.
I love your theme song, and so I'm listening to your theme song. And it always opens. Hey, I'm Generalissimo. I'm the producer of the Hugh Hewitt Show. Don't miss a minute of the Hugh Hewitt Show. Get his podcast at YouTube or at Highly Concentrated You. But let me tell you what I think. That's
66 editions of this podcast
3:05.
I've done.
3:05. I'm listening. It's good. I don't listen.
Did you like the top 10?
I did. I didn't know that you had those hot air columns. I don't read them.
Well, okay.
I listen.
Okay.
I don't read as much anymore.
Next
I'm
week,
teaching.
Lilacs is in. He's going to do the top 10.
Okay, excellent. If you don't listen to Dwayne's World,
fun.
Do get it. But meanwhile, myPhDweightloss.com, 864-644-1900.
That's 864-644-1900.
Why should anyone go to myPhDweightloss.com?
Because if you need to lose weight, this is the way to do it safely, effectively, and with some accountability so that you can learn to keep it off and change your habits so that you don't put it back on again.
And you heard about it on the Hugh Hewitt Show, which will lead the next edition of Dwayne's World. 3:05. Just wanted to say, we're always listening, always watching. Speaking of which, my PhD weight loss. Now, I do want to play one cut because the leader of PragerU got together with Dennis's son and got us an update. I want you to hear how Dennis is doing from their lips. David Prager, and here you go.
Hey, PragerU fam. I'm here with David Prager.
Hi.
And David is giving me an update on how Dennis, his dad, is doing. And we thought that we'll just go on and share some of it with you. And so, David, you've been visiting with Dennis for the last few days.
Yes.
Just give us a quick update on his healing.
Yeah. So some interesting positive developments. First of all, it's a long, as I've said before, a very long process and road to recovery, whatever that recovery means. I think two great things happened this week. The first was he was speaking a lot, and his speech was better than I'd ever heard. I mean, if you turned on the radio and you listened to Dennis, you would not know that anything was a matter.
Wow.
Now, does that happen every day? No, it doesn't happen every day, but it demonstrates, and this was positive development number two, that we spoke to a doctor, a very well-known doctor who took care of some really well-known patients in the spinal cord injury space, who basically said that the development, the health development that he's been showing, the improvement that he's been showing, is signs that the injury is not as bad as some people assumed. And also the fact that he can speak like he did demonstrates that he will get to that point on a much more consistent basis eventually. So that's a huge deal. Again, it's a very long road. I think one of the things that all of you should know is he loves the letters, he loves the reach outs. And it's important to know, as we've said to a lot of our top donors before, PragerU, it has always been and will continue to be in very good hands while he recovers.
That's what I wanted you to know and hear. It's longer. Go find it over at PragerU on X. Watch the whole thing with the president of PragerU and with David Prager. Very uplifting, very inspiring. The fires have played havoc with the ability to get up to see Dennis, but I hope to do so soon and give you my own report. But David Prager knows of which he speaks. That's great news. Matt Continetti is a columnist with the Washington Free Beacon, a contributing editor to Commentary Magazine and Podcast, and a fellow at American Enterprise Institute. Matt joins me most Fridays to look back at the week. Matt, good Friday to you. How are you?
I'm well, Hugh. Good Friday to you, too.
Thank you. Now, Matt, I go up the implacable hill every day, usually listening to commentary, and you guys dropped the pod late today, noted critique. So instead, I listen to Dan Senor talking to Tal Becker. Tal Becker, for the benefit of the audience, very, very distinguished international lawyer and very prominent, famed Israeli attorney. And they went over the flaws in Israel's conception about Hamas, which rivaled the flaws in the 1973 conception, but they never really explained what it meant. I know what it means. Would you explain what the conception is and why it was so bad in 1973 and again in October of 2024?
Well, this conception, this strategic concept guides the Israeli political and military echelons in their defense. In 1973, the idea was that there would be no direct surprise attack on Israel, and that was, of course, proven wrong by the Arab invasion on Yom Kippur, setting off the Yom Kippur War in 1973. The conception, as I see it 50 years later, was that basically Hamas, left in power in Gaza, could be dealt with, that the real threat was Hezbollah in the north of Israel, but that Hamas was a terrorist state in Gaza, but it could be bought off, and every now and then, if it launched too many rockets into Israel, the Israelis would, as they say, mow the lawn and conduct an air campaign until another ceasefire was reached. That idea that you could handle Hamas and had to worry more about Hezbollah was proven false by the events of October 7th, 2023.
Now, I've always understood it to be a conception is also an all-encompassing, genuinely and generally agreed upon set of assumptions, so that in 1973, it wasn't just Golda Meir and the IDF that believed that there was no threat from Egypt and Syria that they wouldn't know about. And in October of 2023, it wasn't just Netanyahu, but parties to the left and right agreed that Hamas was not really a threat. So is that, I want people to, it's everybody kind of agrees with something, right?
Yeah, it's buy-in. It's the whole government, the parties, they more or less agree. Now, there are always dissenters, but they tend to be marginal. And there's more, I think, cohesion in the national security, parts of the Israeli government than there are typically, say, in modern day America. But you're right, Hugh. It's everyone kind of buys into these ideas, which were proven false in 1973 and then again in 2023.
Now, what I want to raise with you in the segments on and off air is where the American concepcion might be way off. And do you think there is an American concepcion? Because I do.
Well, I think there was definitely a conception for the Biden administration. That was, I think, defined by de-escalation, the idea that there would be peace if only we gave our adversaries diplomatic off-ramps. And so you wouldn't want to escalate any situation because that might make things more dangerous in Ukraine. It might make things more dangerous in the Middle East with Iran or with the Houthis. And the remarkable event of this week, of course, was that that conception was swept away and a new one is being put in place. We still haven't seen its totality, but we can see the outlines of Donald Trump's America First idea replacing the flawed Biden idea of de-escalation.
And even prior, what I'm going to argue to you, and I'll put the first proposition out before we go to the break, is that one conception that exists is that America does not cancel treaties. And in fact, Trump has threatened, President Trump has said to Panama, I might simply cancel our treaty. And in fact, the most recent exercise of that was 1977, when Jimmy Carter canceled the defense treaty with Taiwan. Do you think it's part of the American conception that we don't cancel treaties, but that's not always the case?
It's definitely part of the liberal, internationalist, democratic conception. But of course, George W. took us out of the Kyoto Protocol, and Donald Trump took us out of the Paris Climate Accord, not once but twice, most recently this week. And now he's looking at Panama too.
Matt, I was teaching my law students this week. I've been teaching con law since 1995. And I told them about Carter canceling the treaty with Taiwan, and it was news to them. They're kids. They're 22 to 25 years old. Then I told them that, the music. Then I told them that President George H.W. Bush had actually invaded Panama in 1989 to get Noriega, and we'd sent troops. It was bloody. 23 Americans died. Hundreds of Panamanians died. And then we got out. And news to them, nobody covers that. Is that part of our conception that we just forget stuff that's inconvenient to our ideology?
Well, that's certainly my experience too, Hugh, as a teacher and as a college professor, especially the recent past. You know, I've always thought it was because that most high school history classes just end with the Second World War, if they even get that far, you know? So much of the 20th century is just not covered in high school. And so when they come to college, you have to fill in the gaps. So I agree, forgetting the past 70 years is a widespread national problem. But I will say this as well. We talk about this conception, talk about treaties. Republicans in the 21st century are more, I think, interested in removing ourselves from these treaties that tie us down. But what Donald Trump did do this week is explicitly reject the conception that American borders are static. And that has been a bipartisan idea now for almost 100 years, right? I mean, and so it's remarkable to hear him say again and again and again that under his second term, American territory will expand. And I think the world is just beginning to realize, Hugh, he means it. He means it. He means it in Greenland. He means it in Panama. Maybe he's still kidding on Canada.
Kidding,
but he just said it again today when he was visiting North Carolina, that Canada will be the 51st state.
It's a good jab, and it makes the Canadians wake up. But he's going to love Pierre Poilievre so much he's going to stop saying that. I do think he wants Greenland for very serious reasons. And I point my liberal friends, in 2014, were you in favor of Scotland holding a referendum on their independence? Shouldn't the Greenlanders have it? They're only 55 to 60,000. And what do you think, Matt? Should they be allowed to have a vote on this?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. I mean, I don't think America should stand still as Greenland is victimized by Danish imperialism. And,
Ah!
and if the Greenlanders decide that they want to connect with us to become more intertwined with the United States, I think that's a good thing. This is the new great game, Hugh, is the Arctic, because you see how the Arctic can be a base for Russian influence, which we want to prevent. You can see how the Chinese might be interested in Arctic resources and Arctic pathways for their navy if ever they break through that first island chain. And then, of course, Greenland contains so many natural resources. And America has expressed an interest in acquiring Greenland in the past. So it's definitely, I think, a shock to the system when Trump brings this up, but it is well in tune with historical themes
and with
running
real
back
politics.
many years.
With real
And real
politics.
politics.
We skip pretty quickly from the president's inaugural address through the Canada expansion on to Greenland, which will be ours soon. I'm joking. You got to listen to the whole thing on the podcast. Matt, now let's take the analogy. Israel had a very deeply flawed and dangerous conception in 73 and then again in 2023 and hurt them badly. Do we have a flawed conception of NATO in this millennium?
I think that NATO has been a very successful alliance, Hugh. And I think when you compare NATO's record against the record of another post-war institution, the United Nations, it's clear that NATO is much more successful and much more a force for good. I do think, though, that the conception that Europe can free ride on American defense expenditure is terribly flawed. And when you look at the track that Europe has gone down in recent decades in this post-Cold War era, it has been on the decline. It has deindustrialized its economy in the 21st century so that the Europeans are poorer now. We just had a new study out today showing that the youngest Americans, the Gen Z Americans, are flourishing far better than their counterparts in Europe. When you look at how the Green New Deal and regulations have quashed innovation in Europe, and then, of course, you look at how the European welfare states spend almost nothing on defense, that it takes a change agent like Donald Trump to rattle the cages and get them to spend more. I'd say that's the big flaw in the NATO concept, not the idea that there should be an alliance based on certain values that holds Europe secure, Europe the source of the two most devastating wars in human history. But the flaw is that America should be responsible for the defense, and there should be very little proportional contribution from the other member states.
And this is exactly right. I want to expand on that because Poland is carrying its weight. And certainly our allies in Europe sent troops in the aftermath of 9/11 to Afghanistan. Some of them lost their lives. The United Kingdom is carrying its weight. Maybe it needs to do more, but they're carrying their weight. The big dog in the not doing their job category is Germany, Matt. And I really don't know why we should be picking up the tab for Germany. Do you?
Well, a while back, you would say, look at how rich Germany is. We shouldn't be picking up the tab. Now we look and we say, well, look how irresponsible Germany is. Why are we picking up the tab? Because Germany isn't that rich anymore. The economic model they've pursued has run into the shoals. And it's not just a question of kind of leaning too heavily on imports, or rather leaning too heavily on exporting to China. But it's also this Green New Deal madness, which the Germans have always kind of been susceptible to and has really, really harmed their economy. Germany is a problem. It's always been a problem in European history. But the problem now is that its political class has made a series of poor decisions and does not seem ready to accept the role it needs to take in leading European defense and shouldering more of the burden. But now that Trump is in power, I think they're going to be reminded of this again and again and again.
So can we add to our list of clarifications to the conception? Russia is no longer our biggest threat. China is our biggest threat. We need the Quad to be propped up. And by the way, space is not demilitarized, no matter how much we might want it to be. We need Elon Musk and other people with space buses to come up with what we need to counter the Chi-Coms because they're in space. Is that part of our flawed conception that we think space is just, Star Trek-y and their Klingons aren't here yet? And the Klingons are here and they're called Xi Jinping.
Right. Well, you remind me, Hugh, that we left out in our catalog of American neo-manifest destiny, Mars, which got a shout out in the inaugural as well, and led Elon to cheer in the background for posterity. No, space is becoming militarized. We had that news of a potential Russian nuclear space weapon that Mike Turner, when he was head of the House Intelligence Committee, broke to the world last year. I think the conception that's flawed and we should correct is the idea that the bad guys, the Russias, the Chinas, the Irans, and the North Koreas, are all isolated cases. That might have been the case in the past, but what happened under Biden and the collapse of American deterrence under his presidency and the Biden-Harris administration essentially put these four countries together in a bloc. And so when we think about national security in the world, we have to recognize that, yes, Russia is fighting in Ukraine, but China has assisted Russia in many ways. The North Koreans are supplying frontline troops fighting in Russia in that Kursk salient there against Ukraine. And the Iranians, of course, have been supplying the drones to Russia, as well as funding these proxies, which were causing so much damage and terrorism until Israel finally began to take action against them last year.
Excellent addition. The conception has to change. It is an alliance of evil, bad people, not, what did you say, isolated cases. I love that. I'm going to use that. I will credit you occasionally. But I also want to steal something from commentary. Our friend Tom Cotton, and he really is our friend, he came to D.C. before Donald Trump did. He's very cold-eyed and realistic about the world. Are there others that you can point to? I think Donald Trump might be as well. I think maybe Rubio is. What do you? I know Mike Waltz is. What do you think?
Waltz, Rubio, Stefanik, I think, is younger than Cotton, but she really has become a star on national security. Tom Cotton is a serious person, and he also has a kind of spine to him. He's very conservative, but he knows how to frame arguments in ways that resound in common sense terms. And I think that's why he's such an influential part outside the White House, outside the administration in this new era. Is that
I certainly hope he calls up the president and says, put the Secret Service back on Secretary Pompeo, Brian Hook, and everybody else who's under threat from Iran. Matt, when we're talking about the American conception, I always worry that we have a conception that our arsenal is so big it doesn't need to be bigger, and our ships are better than the Chinese ships so they don't have to be as numerous. Do you think reality is coming to D.C. about our military unpreparedness at this moment?
Well, President Trump has said many times that he wants to build ships. He told you that, Hugh, in a recent interview. I think he understands that our Navy is too small. And I think there are certainly members of Congress, we spoke about a few of them in an earlier segment, who also agree that the defense expenditure of the United States is not up to the task. It's interesting. Trump recently has been calling for NATO members to increase their defense expenditure to 5% of their economy. That would be a huge increase for the Europeans and a necessary one. But it would also be an increase for us if we were to do that as well. So we are not the only, the Europeans are not the only countries who have let their defense go to waste. And I'd also say, Hugh, we've reached this very dangerous moment where our debt service is now higher than our annual defense budget. And as the historian Neil Ferguson points out, when that has happened to great powers in the past, it's set them on the road to decline. So if President Trump is correct and American decline ended this week, that would mean that we need to spend more on defense, and we need to get that debt and the cost of servicing the debt lower than what we're spending on protecting Americans.
Matt, I've got three quick revenue questions for you. I'll put them on the table now, and we'll talk about them after the break. We may have to drag you for 4 extra minutes. I want to tax every gambling transaction in the United States because it's bad. It's going to produce a generation of gambling addicts, and the federal government gets nothing out of it. Number two, I want to tax every dope. Dope is legal everywhere now, not everywhere, but pretty close to everywhere. We ought to have a federal tax on that, excise tax, and preempt the states because they've screwed it up. And then finally, there are trillions in 401k and IRAs that if we gave a 10% one-time tax on their transfer to Roth, we would reap a gazillion dollars. The present discounted value of the retirement benefits eventually taxed is probably equal to what we'd get immediately. I want to tax gambling, every single transaction that's done online. I want to tax dope sales everywhere for the feds. And I want a one-time conversion of IRA and 401ks to Roth IRAs, tax at 10%. What do you think?
I think they're all great ideas. I'm a old-fashioned social conservative, so I would rather we restrict gambling much more than it is allowed today. And I would rather we make marijuana much harder to get and to use than it is today. But if we are going to kind of persist in the current ways that we deal with both gambling and marijuana, I see no reason why we shouldn't impose pretty heavy taxes on them. This has been done before with alcohol and with cigarettes, so it makes sense that you would do it with other vices such as gambling and marijuana. And then on the IRA transfer, that's a great idea. It'd kind of be a boost of money. I would say I would add to it. We can make some money off selling federal land. This is an idea that Thomas Sowell has proposed. And, I think America's greatest days have been when we're selling land to Americans and giving them the opportunity. It would probably lower real estate prices as well. And then also an idea that just came out from our friend Stephen Moore today was let's auction off some of the EM spectrum. The government owns a huge amount of the spectrum. You can make a lot of money off of that because the spectrum is very valuable. So I think there are creative ways to raise revenues here. And let's not forget, the endowment tax on these huge hedge funds like universities that have been these dens of iniquity and villainy and anti-Semitism. There are creative ways to raise revenue.
You anticipated my penultimate question. I love Trump's EO on DEI. It's actually an EO on restoring constitutional order to the United States, where we are not to inflict penalties or award benefits on the basis of race, color, creed, ethnicity. Did you applaud that EO?
Oh, I was just saying before we went on that I think it was probably the most important executive order that he issued out of all the ones, this flurry of activity, Hugh, because it restores the American promise. And I think it was appropriate that he did it on Martin Luther King Day, making sure that Americans are judged by the content of their character, not the color of their skin. That is the American dream. And so it's very important that we spend these next 4 years taking apart this DEI structure that's been so corrosive to freedom and to excellence. And also, though, we need to make this stuff last. And I think that will require congressional action down the road as well.
Matt, I asked Ruthie Bloom this yesterday. I discovered Ruthie by virtue of the Commentary podcast, which is my daily, as long as you guys get it done early enough, I get to listen to it when I exercise. I asked Ruthie about Bibi Netanyahu and how he's waged the war and whether or not he can win election. He said, it's my earnest and fervent hope that he continues the end to his term and decides not to run again. And then we talked about the fact he's been sort of a genius in the waging of this war. Churchill. This is the 60th anniversary, by the way, of Churchill's death. The first thing you see when you walk into Westminster Cathedral is a slab that says, remember Winston Churchill, so I will with you and I will with Ben coming up. What is your assessment of Prime Minister Netanyahu's performance since 10/7 and his political future?
Well, he is a Churchillian figure. I mean, Israel's longest serving prime minister, someone who has gone through so many American administrations and learned to deal with them. He was dealt a grievous blow on October 7th, and I do think that Israel's just beginning the process of trying to figure out what went wrong and to hold the people accountable for what went wrong. But I think that Netanyahu's performance during the war has restored his prestige among the Israeli public and certainly on the world stage. In that neighborhood, Hugh, the Middle East, you have to be strong. You have to show strength, or else all your enemies will seize their opportunities. That's what Netanyahu did last year. And so I think that has helped Israel, and I think it's helped his political career. The question is, for me, what will happen with the rest of this ceasefire? Will Israel recover as many hostages as it can? Will it last? And then, if, as I believe is likely, it will collapse eventually, what next? How does Netanyahu handle that challenge? We don't know the answer to that question, but we do know he is one very clever and creative and strong figure. And so I think he'll do the right thing.
Matt Continetti, I appreciate the extra time. A blessed Shabbat to you and your family, and I will talk to you next Friday. Hope you enjoy the new hour here on the afternoon shift of the Hugh Hewitt Show. Thank you, Matt. Ben Domenech, editor-at-large for The Spectator, host of the Ben Domenech podcast, contributor to Fox News. Good Friday to you, Ben. I'm going to go in reverse order of issues that I covered with Matt Continetti in the last hour. I want to begin with, it is the 60th anniversary of the death of Winston Churchill. When you walk into Westminster Cathedral, there's a slab in green marble that says simply, "Remember Winston Churchill." Want to take a swing at that, Ben?
I would commend to your listeners to read the works of Winston Churchill that they are unfamiliar with. By that I mean everyone is familiar, I think, with some of the most famous speeches that he gave. But when I was a young speechwriter in the Bush White House, I would go up to the library in the old executive office building, the Ike, and there they had a complete collection of Winston Churchill's speeches, which I have since purchased for myself. And those speeches include speeches he gave behind the scenes, things that he was saying that were only heard by other members of Parliament during the course of the war. And they are just magnificent, meaning that behind the scenes, he was as eloquent and as moving as he was when he was on the center stage. I commend that to everyone to read, and also I would commend My Early Life, which is one of the most incredible books when you read it. I mean, it's the kind of thing that you should give to, I think, every young boy. If you have a son or a nephew, you should give it to them very early on, because it really puts in perspective what came before for Winston that informed so much of what came later. The line from it that is cited so often, of course, is that there is nothing so exhilarating as being shot at without result. But it's one of these things that I think people see the main figure. They see the man who emerged at the end of all of this. But what came before is just as important. And to understand it in the perspective of time as someone who saved the West, saved Western civilization in that critical moment, is something that should be truly appreciated in full.
No wonder you're such a fine writer. You cannot help but be a better writer if you read Churchill, and I would commend to the audience, I'm going to only add to Ben, the history of the English-speaking people received the Nobel Prize for Literature, and it is a romping, wonderful, rousing history of the West.
It's fantastic.
Yeah. It's just
It's fantastic. But I would just commend to you, again, Hugh, if you go back and you can open up this collection, and you can find it, by the way, it's not that expensive to purchase it. It's 7 full books, and it has all of the different, behind-the-scenes conversations. These things are incredible because they show you the thought process that he had that wasn't just about rousing the country and the English-speaking people against the Nazi menace and everything that he saw going on there. It was also something where behind the scenes he is working the people around him, understanding how difficult a position that they are in. And to me, that is just a primer in political engagement that is unparalleled.
I can't add to that. That is a great way to remember Winston Churchill on the 60th anniversary of his death. Second topic, Benjamin Netanyahu. We are on the eve of what will almost certainly be a Hamas betrayal. We're used to it. The Israelis might accept that betrayal. But I want to focus on Prime Minister Netanyahu, who, as Matt Continetti says, Churchillian in his own right. How do you think he has waged the war since he was surprised, as was the IDF, on 10/7?
I think he has waged it as a war of survival because he understands how critical it is. This is a moment for Israel where they had to respond in the way that they did, despite the fact that they were not getting the support that they needed from their most critical Western ally. The Biden administration did everything that they could to undermine them. Over and over again, they viewed this through the lens of domestic politics in a way that I think was deeply inappropriate and wrong. But I think that Netanyahu has stood strong. I think that he has gotten to this point because of standing strong. But there are also, I think, enormous pressures on them going forward and questions about what they are going to do next in terms of this reestablishment, quite frankly, of Hamas as the leaders in Gaza in a way that I believe to be unacceptable, and I think that they think that way too. So what he does now and where he goes from here is going to require, I think, a deft touch from this new administration. The people who are in positions there are people who I have confidence in, particularly Marco Rubio, when it comes to the Israel question. And that's something that I think, is a positive for them. But again, it requires a deft touch to navigate through this, in a way that frankly leverages the relationships that Donald Trump established in his first administration with a number of different countries in the Middle East. That was a massive change from what we had seen before.
Now, Ben, we turn to the president, President Trump. A near perfect first week. And I want you to tell me your favorite thing he did and the favorite thing he said and the worst. I'll go first. Favorite is the inaugural address, the Golden Age speech. Favorite thing he did is the DEI-EO, which restores constitutional order. And I'm not sure he did this, but I'm going to find out. They've withdrawn Secret Service protection from Secretary of State Pompeo. And I believe the active Iranian threat is still there. That dance on the edge of a cliff. He's my friend, but more importantly, it makes America look weak. It makes Donald Trump look terribly, terribly indifferent to the security of someone who served him well, even if they have their disagreements. What do you think about best thing he said, best thing he did, and first false start?
So I'll actually agree with you on that, but I'll find a different subject for the worst thing that he did. The best thing, frankly, the thing that made me laugh the most was dancing to YMCA with the sword in his hand.
That's a different category.
It was hilarious. I saw it on my phone as I was walking through the frigid streets of Washington D.C. All the way from downtown almost to Georgetown in order to get an Uber back home because unfortunately a scattered producer had forgotten to book a car for me. So I watched it and I bust out laughing because it was just hilarious. I actually think that these executive orders related to the border are a phenomenal shift, and as big of a shift as perhaps we've ever seen on an issue.
Did you see the Marines deploy today? That's worth like $1 billion of budget.
It is incredible, and so from my perspective, to finally cross that line, I wrote about it, years ago in the New York Post. To finally recognize the threat of the cartels for what they are and for how many Americans and American lives they have ruined is phenomenal. For the worst thing, I agree with you. Like I said, let me just pick one other thing, though. I do think that it is unwise for the president to take potentially this attitude that he has toward Republicans in the Senate. Meaning, he was critical, obviously, of Lisa Murkowski and Susan Collins, but then he got wrong the fact that he thought that, Mitch McConnell had voted against Pete Hegseth. From my perspective, this should be the moment where the president is seeking to unify his party and reaching out to these people and basically saying, look, do you want to try to be a thorn in my side for the next 4 years, or do you want to try to find ways to work together? Let's do a deal, let's give and take, and let's figure that out. And from my perspective, that's the one thing that I think has gotten off, a little bit off because, again, he's triumphant in this moment. He has the support of the American people, and he feels like everybody should be in on his agenda and in on his cabinet nominees. But I think that there's a way to sort of cross some of these lines and get people on your side without just immediately going into defense mode.
All right, Ben, I think that's all well said. The most important thing I want to cover in this segment, the off-air segment, is Israel had a conception, whatever they called it, that was wrong in 73 to its near extinction and was wrong on 10/7 to the horror of the world. And you can't make that. Palmerston, I'm going to paraphrase him. I think he said we have no permanent allies, no permanent enemies, only permanent interests. I think the American conception, like the Israeli, is frozen. It's frozen that we can't do anything about the Panama Canal because we have a treaty, forgetting that Carter canceled the treaty with Taiwan and Goldwater sued and the Supreme Court said, go away. And forgetting that NATO was supposed to be joint, not a ward of the state, and they haven't carried their load, and I want to exempt out Poland and a few others. Do you think there are big flaws, blind spots in the American conception?
I do think that there are, and I also think that, unfortunately, Hugh, we are dealing with a cadre of people who primarily see American foreign policy through the lens of the last 25 years.
Yes,
which is not, again, not to say that that's wrong. It's more that it's limited. You are not seeing it in the bigger picture. And because of that, I think that is a limiting focus. It's one that is primarily, and even someone as brilliant as J.D. Vance, I think, can suffer from the fact that, they view things through the lens of the Iraq War, of Afghanistan, of the decisions that we've made related to the last 20 to 25 years. We need to have a broader perspective.
Man, I have a group of very smart law students this semester, but I was kind of stunned. None of them knew that Jimmy Carter had abrogated the treaty with Taiwan in 1977. Goldwater sued, and the Supreme Court said, off with you, it's up to the president. None of them knew that George H.W. Bush ordered the invasion of Panama. And so
that's more depressing.
They're Gen Zers. Every one of them is a Gen Zer. And so that happened in 1989 to early 1990. That's before they were born by 5 years. It's ancient, dusty history. So I think people just have to realize when Trump says to Panama, you're not honoring the deal, it's up to him to abrogate that treaty. That's settled law. And if he wants to take it back, he can. I'm not sure it's a good idea. I'll probably argue it isn't, but he could.
Well, I think it is. I think it's a good idea. But here's what. Look, I have a unique perspective on this only because my father grew up in the Panama Canal Zone and was in fact subject to the protests, the student protests.
I did not know that. I knew your father-in-law was born there, but I didn't know
my father-in-law was born there. My father grew up there. By the way, Hugh, do you know how those protests started?
No.
So those protests started because, of all things, there was an American high school that was there in Panama, and it had two flags over it. It had a Panama flag and it had an American flag. And some students with gumption, teenage boys, brave Americans, decided that they didn't like the fact that there was a Panama flag there, and they tore it down. And then they put it back up, of course, and they had to apologize to the locals and that kind of thing. And then the Panamanian students showed up about a couple of weeks later with designs on tearing the American flag down, except the other students found out about it in advance and met them with force.
They're like the Fighting Irish meeting the Ku Klux Klan, which I learned about this week. I didn't know that's where their name came from.
And that became this explosive thing. And then, before you knew it, people were taking pot shots at American military soldiers. So anyway, look, I think that one of the things that we need to understand about this administration is that, this is Donald Trump doing everything that he wants to do and doing it rapidly. And it's an understanding on their part, I think, especially among Susie Wiles and the top brass there, that you've got 18 months to advance your agenda, realistically, before things, could potentially go sideways in the midterms and you've got all sorts of new challenges and you effectively become a lame duck, as any president would in their second term. So I think that in this instance, this is the president going, completely to the wall in terms of advancing his agenda. The only thing that I would caution is that is a risky move if you don't have all your ducks in a row and you don't know exactly what you're doing on a day-to-day basis. And I think that, they need to get people in there as quickly as possible in order to be able to do that, especially these cabinet picks.
I agree with you, Ben, and I hope they don't push for annexing Greenland. They push for a referendum for the Greenlanders like the Scots had in 2014. Let's see what
I would love that.
Yeah, let's see what they think.
And it's important. It's important.
Ben Domenech, always a pleasure. Follow him on X at B Domenech. Get his podcast. Read The Spectator. I'll be right back. Now, I want to remind you, those of you who are new, if you are if you are, hey, I like the interview. I do a lot of interviews. This is the difference between me and a lot of talk show hosts. I like to talk to people like Ben Domenech and Matt Continetti coming up, Senator Jim Talent coming up, Jim Garrity coming up, Tarzana Joe. I talked to Senator Cotton on Monday. He's scheduled to come in. I do a lot of interviews. Don't do as many calls. My number is 1-800-520-1234. 1-800-520-1234. Call me anytime. You might not get through. Lines are jammed or they're closed. 1-800-520-1234. But if you miss anything, like there's a lot going on this program off air that I put onto the YouTube channel, Hugh Hewitt YouTube channel. And I mean, you don't get smarter than Continetti and Domenech. You don't. I mean, there are other people who are their equal, and there are people who are more wired in. Like the President of the United States was here 2 weeks and 2 days ago. And I would suggest you might want to subscribe to the Hugh Hewitt feed at YouTube. So you know, you don't have to listen to them all, but at least make sure you know when the good ones come along and you pick and choose. Or go to Highly Concentrated Hugh at Apple Podcasts or the Salem Podcast Network or iTunes or Spotify. Wherever you get your podcasts, you'll find Highly Concentrated Hugh. Harley and Dwayne and Adam put together the best of the best. So you don't hear on the podcast about the wonders of all of my wonderful sponsors. You hear only about content. But you also hear the stuff that goes on off air. Like today, there'll be my opening monologue. There'll be 5 segments with Matt Continetti, 6 maybe, and 2 segments with Ben Domenech. All at once, get your exercise in. The way I listen to Commentary Pod or National Review Pod or The McCarthy Report or Call Me Back or Megyn Kelly. Or I listen to National Review Pod. I listen to all these things. Now, you want to listen to me or you want to listen to Dwayne, get Dwayne's World, because even after 3 hours, I haven't touched the cut sheet yet. Let's listen to Donald Trump tell California what he wants. Cut number 14.
I want to see 2 things in Los Angeles. Voter ID, so that the people have a chance to vote. And I want to see the water be released and come down into Los Angeles and throughout the state. Those are the 2 things. After that, I will be the greatest president that California has ever seen. I want the water to come down and come down to Los Angeles and also go out to all the farmland that's barren and dry. You know, they have land that they say is the equivalent of the land in Iowa, which is about as good as there is anywhere on earth. The problem is it's artificial because they artificially stop the water from going onto the land. So I want 2 things. I want voter ID for the people of California, and they all want it. Right now you don't have voter ID. People want to have voter identification. You want to have proof of citizenship. Ideally, you have one-day voting, but I just want voter ID as a start, and I want the water to be released, and they're going to get a lot of help from the U.S. Thank you.
I love it when he does a lot of help.
We'll see you at the...
A lot of help. I don't want a dime for California. I want a lot for Californians who've lost everything. It ought to be like 9/11. Open up a fund for those people if they weren't insured. But I don't want to send more money, good money after bad money. California's water system is a nightmare. And he's absolutely right. It's a Delta smelt and the Chinook salmon. It's idiocy, absolute idiocy. We are driving up the cost of everything in America by not letting the Central Valley produce what the Central Valley could do. And he's right. As for voting in California, voting ID will not fix. He's asking for too little. You know, it took 38 days to certify, 38 days. Florida certified its vote like in a week, and it was done voting and counted on the night of the election. We do not need this idiocy out here. Now, I lived here. I was a citizen. I'm not a voter. I'm not a citizen. I'm a citizen of the great Commonwealth of Virginia. We can vote in one day in Virginia. No less complex than California, and they have lots of liberal voting and early voting. Not against early voting, not against mail voting, not against any of that. Count the doggone votes. Just count them. Because 38 days is way too third worldish. And there is fraud and abuse, and it's legal. It's legal. The SEIU is a Hoover. And if you don't know what that is, look it up. I had a law student didn't know what hoovering it up meant. But you want to hear some more? Here's Donald Trump talking about deportation day, cut number 15.
About the deportation flights, where are they going from? Where are they going to? Deportation's going very well. We're getting the bad, hard criminals out. These are murderers. These are people that have been as bad as you get, as bad as anybody you've seen. We're taking them out first. Thank you.
He's right, and they did it. One more cut. Donald Trump, Oval Office signing yesterday, releasing the JFK, MLK, RFK files. Cut number 1.
Relating to the assassinations of President John F. Kennedy, Senator Robert F. Kennedy, and the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
That's a big one, huh? A lot of people are waiting for this for years, for decades. And everything will be revealed.
I love that. Stop. And everything will be revealed. I heard that first on Dwayne's World today. I thought to myself, why didn't Dwayne give that to me yesterday? Really, I hear it on Dwayne's World, and it's because it happened after the show. Allegedly. I got to declassify the files on Dwayne to find out whether or not that's. Listen to Dwayne's World or go to Dwayne.world, and you'll hear the whole thing. Donald Trump is the Rosetta Stone for everything that happened for the last 10 years. I explained that on yesterday's program, and you can go listen to the YouTube segment. I put Rosetta in the title so you can find it. I want to tell you how badly he broke Politico. Donald Trump absolutely shattered Politico, which was, at its birth, a noble effort to bring together the best reporters inside the Beltway to actually tell you what was happening without spin and without bias. Now it's a deeply, deeply wrecked place. It's left-wing. It's hard left-wing. And I couldn't prove that. I just tell you, when Ben Shapiro was going to be editor for a day or a week of their playbook, I was lined up to do it too. And then they fired Ben because the staff revolted. That morons. In any event, I didn't know how badly broken it was until Mark Caputo, who's a very fine reporter, went on Tara Palmieri's podcast and said this, cut number 11.
Another great example when Politico did that terrible, ill-fated headline. 51 intelligence agents or former intelligence agents say that the Hunter Biden laptop was disinformation,
right?
Or bore the hallmarks of disinformation. Turns out that story was closer to disinformation because the Hunter Biden laptop appeared to be true.
But then Facebook also pulled all stories down about the Hunter Biden laptop, and I think Twitter did at the same time too.
Correct.
Yeah.
They punished the New York Post. It didn't help. I mean, Politico, my former employer, and I knew at the time, didn't do itself any favors. I was covering Biden at the time, and I remember coming to my editor and saying, hey, we need to write about the Hunter Biden laptop. And I was told this came from on high at Politico. Don't write about the laptop, don't talk about the laptop, don't tweet about the laptop. And the only thing Politico wound up writing was that piece that called it disinformation, which charitably could be called misinformation at the least.
Yeah, I mean, I had a hard time. I wrote some pretty serious reporting on Hunter Biden, which actually ended up getting him prosecuted, the story on the gun.
Yeah, and I remember you consulted with me because you did the original report on the gun. And you came to me like, how do I write about this? I'm like, honestly, I don't know.
Because it was hard to get it done.
You figured it out. Yeah.
I spent three months on it. I went to the laptop shop and I did all of the reporting in Delaware, and I did all of that. But yeah, it had to be like it had to be 100% nailed down. I had everything, the police reports, I'm a solid reporter, but I do wonder if it would have been published a little quicker. If it was a different type of story.
Well, since we're spilling tea about our former employer, I still have a copy of the story on my external hard drive. In 2019, a rival presidential Democratic campaign of Joe Biden's gave to me the tax lien, the Oppo research, the tax lien on Hunter Biden for the period of time that he worked at Burisma. And I wrote what would have been a classic story saying, the former vice president's son was slapped with a big tax lien for the period of time that he worked for this controversial Ukrainian oil concern or natural gas concern, which is haunting his father on the campaign trail. That story was killed by the editors, and they gave no explanation for that either.
Interesting.
So that general experience, obviously the public doesn't know about those things, but as a reporter, having witnessed the way in which the two candidates
we just get called like the terrible mainstream media. It's like you don't understand the process there.
We also don't understand the dumb decision of cowardly editors.
The man above us when we're trying to do our jobs. You know what I mean? We're just looking for scoops, man.
The big bias is toward a good story.
No, it's not, Mark. The big bias at Politico is to the left. Mark Caputo is a real journalist, and a longtime friend and acquaintance. Not like a friend, but I love Mark. He didn't have his cargo shorts on, which I think is like a violation of his terms of service. And but that's very good. I have 2 questions for Mark. Where are the cargo pants, cargo shorts? And when do you quit, man? When do you quit? I have quit 2 pretty high-profile places because of controversies within. I quit the Weekly Standard when a junior editor spiked a column of mine. Kid didn't know anything about constitutional law. I really didn't know a thing. And he spiked a column, and I spiked them. So Fred Barnes, hey, you come back. Nope, I'm done. You guys crossed my red line. And I tell people going in, my red line. And I kind of spectacularly quit the Washington Post. But I do not spill tea. And so the one thing I don't do is, and Mark didn't either, about individuals. Washington Post is still broken. I'm still friends with people. I had lunch with David Shipley, my editor, after that happened. He didn't offer me, he didn't make an apology, didn't offer me a job back or anything like that. None of that. Haven't heard from Jeff Bezos, nothing. But I have nothing bad to say about David Shipley, a wonderful man. I love Ruth Marcus. She's wrong, but she's really smart. I have nothing. I will not spill tea on former colleagues, ever. Just it's a red line for me. But if somebody spikes a story that's important, quit. People have to be willing to quit. All right? You got to quit. And then you got to tell people why you quit if it's not obvious. I've been doing that forever. Not ragging, not spilling tea, just telling you, why do I quit? I got red line. The indispensable Garrity is in the house. Jim Garrity of National Review. Jim, we got to cover 3 things in 2 segments. So we got to go fast. First important thing. My great and good friend Glenn Byers reminded me today that today is the 60th anniversary of the death of Winston Churchill. If you've been to Westminster Palace, Westminster Cathedral, that palace, you walk into the Palace of Westminster and you see a green marble slab that simply says, remember Winston Churchill. He's not buried there. I've been to his burial place as well. Did you know that, and what do you think of that?
I did not. I don't remember seeing that. I don't know if I ever went through the tour of Westminster. I did go to the Cabinet War Rooms, which was utterly awesome. And if you ever go to London, this is the map rooms. This is where they were basically planning and operating World War II in London as the bombs were coming down on them. And it was like walking into history, and you just feel like you're right back there. And as I understand it, Hugh, his bust is back in the Oval Office again. Huh?
It is indeed.
Yeah. They took out the one that, was it Ward Churchill that Biden had instead? That's a deep cut reference for blogger
Nobody
fans
will get
going
that
back to the Bush
who isn't
days.
at least 50 years old, Jim, but that's fine.
Yeah.
All right, second question. The Buckeyes won the national championship on Monday. I'm still celebrating. I'm wearing my scarlet and gray tie today because it's still. Have you listened to Urban Meyer's Triple Option podcast with Mark Ingram and Rob Stone?
I have not. Now, my good friend and colleague Charlie Cook is a Jacksonville Jaguars fan, and I believe he currently believes that if he ever is in the same room as Urban Meyer, he will physically attack him.
He's wrong. He doesn't know the coach.
All right.
I want you to listen to Triple Option for an analysis.
He did a fantastic job over Jacksonville. Boy, oh boy, wow.
I'm talking college ball right now, college championship.
Okay.
When Urban describes coming back, what Ryan Day did to come back from the abyss. I mean, the abyss of college football is to lose to that team up north for the 4th straight time in the shoe, and then you beat the 4 great teams, including number 1. That's truly unparalleled in sports. Never happened before.
Yeah, by the way, I know everybody's complaining about the playoff schedule or the new playoff system, and it was a little weird that the highest ranked teams kept getting, losing after having a week off and all that stuff, but I think you had just a bunch of really good teams together, and sometimes one really good team is going to be considerably better. And yeah, it would have been great if we had a national championship game that went on to overtime or something like that. I think you could tweak the seeding and things like that. But I think this actually worked pretty well. The ratings were pretty good, and I don't see any reason why there's a need to go to scrap it, go back to the bowl system or anything like that. And I think 8 teams is plenty, by the way. I don't think we need to. Or actually, are we at 8 or 12
We're
now?
at 12, and they're talking about going to 14. I like 12.
Yeah,
I thought the system worked fine. Just
fine.
Seeding. You're absolutely right. Over the target. The seeding needed. Now, Jim, the reason I really like it is not only did the Buckeyes win, but if you're a Browns or a Jets fan, you got games to watch in December, in January.
Very relevant. Yes.
All right, next question.
Doing scouting.
And most difficult one for Jim Garrity, noted critic of Donald Trump, but occasionally a fair man about him. I mean, always fair about him. I would like to know what you think is
fair.
Yeah, the best. Tough but fair is fine. What is the best thing he said and the best thing he did in the first week of the golden age of America?
Okay, I'm going to do two actions because actions matter more than words. I'm going to go with one that was well noticed and one that is not noticed. The first is we're seeing illegal immigrants with criminal records getting loaded onto those planes and shipped back to their home countries. And I think after so long of seeing a lot of people in government make really big promises, Joe Biden promised he was going to cure cancer. Gavin Newsom said he was going to end homelessness in San Francisco. To see somebody in office say, I'm going to do this, and then it actually happens promptly and quickly. Besides the fact that, like, this is good to see, I think it will have a deterrent effect. I think if you didn't get into this country by January 20th, you're probably much less interested in try to get in now. So that was the obvious one. I think the less obvious one was one I wrote about this week. The redesignation of the Houthis as a terrorist group. You want to talk about things that were kind of baffling. Now, when it became ludicrously obvious that taking them off the terrorist list of the State Department was an egregious mistake by Joe Biden, an effort to put a thumb in the eye of the Saudis that backfired in our faces, that basically they had been on the special foreign terrorist organization left, and what Trump announced this week is they're not even special. That they're now just a regular, generic Diet Coke terrorist group. I'm very glad to see this. This is long overdue. I noticed the Houthis, released a couple of hostages. They were not U.S. hostages, but they had seized the crew of a boat. And they said that this week they no longer intend to attack U.S. and British ships because of the Israel-Hamas deal that they have in the works.
Convenient, isn't it? Very convenient.
Yeah. Now here's the thing. They could be doing it for any old reasons, but you can't help but notice that this announced change in policy just happens to align with a different president in there, who is not doddering. And the other thing is I think Biden, basically gave one speech on each topic, and then he largely forgot about it. And then you just never heard from him about it again. And the U.S. Navy in the Red Sea and around the Gulf of Oman was basically having one of the most intense. This is not me saying this; is the Associated Press reporting from there, saying that this was the most intense naval fights that the U.S. Navy had seen since World War II. Hugh, how many major stories do you remember seeing on this?
Yeah, none.
Both Biden and Harris said during the campaign, U.S. forces were not in combat anywhere in the world.
None.
And that was a lie.
It was a lie.
So yeah. So.
All right, now Jim.
So those are the two things he did that are most important.
I got you for 5 more minutes, and part of it will be off air, but I want to set it up for the audience so they go listen to it on YouTube. There's a constitutional law case called Baltimore v. Barron, very famous from 200 years ago. Chief Justice Marshall writes, this is a question of much importance but not great difficulty, or vice versa, great importance and not much difficulty. And it was a question about whether or not the Constitution covered the taking of property in Baltimore that done by Maryland. At the time, it didn't. Now I am personally happy that Donald Trump issued the birthright citizenship EO because, contra what the district court judge in Washington State said, it's not settled law. I think it's an easy question, but it's never been decided, and I think they're going to decide 7-2, 8-1, maybe 9-0. If you're born in the United States, you're a citizen of the United States unless you're a child of an accredited diplomat. But I'm glad he's going to close the book. I told Ro Khanna that yesterday. He said, oh, good spin. It's not spin. We need to shut the door on this. Jim Garrity, columnist for the Washington Post, a contributor at National Review. The Morning Jolt is a newsletter you must subscribe to. Also has 2 podcasts, 3 Martini Lunch, and frequent contributor to the editors. I recommend them all to you. Jim, what do you make of the citizenship at birth debate?
I think actually you characterized it pretty well, Hugh. Now, I'm skeptical that the Supreme Court is going to say you can redefine this by executive order. I think they're going to say, no, there's too much precedent on this that demonstrates, and you could make the argument of, whether there was such a thing as anchor babies or these other terms, this idea of the value of being born in this country. And my colleague Ramesh Ponnuru had the very smart observation that, like, what people get really angry about this, it's very rarely the idea that the child being born in the U.S. soil becomes an American citizen. It's that by them being born on U.S. soil, it makes it easier for everyone else in their family to get into the immigration process. That's what I think really, drives people nuts. But you look at the previous case law, not just this one. I believe it was a 1982 case, and Hugh, you know the case names better than I do. It basically said
the key one is Wong Kim Ark in 1898.
Correct, but there's another one from 1982 that basically said the 14th Amendment applied to school children in Texas who were basically illegal immigrants, right? So by that sense, the 14th Amendment does apply to illegal immigrants. Now, I think if the Congress passes a law and says, you know what, for purposes under the law, being born in the United States, if both of your parents are here in the country illegally, then no, you are not automatically a U.S. citizen. I think the Supreme Court might uphold that. And I'm not just saying
I don't, Jim. I want to make sure people aren't misled, because Section 4 of the 14th Amendment is for enforcement purposes only. For the purposes of the 14th Amendment, that's beyond that. Clearly, in 1868, they weren't thinking about illegal aliens having babies. And so I don't think Section 4 would reach that, and it's been limited before. But you're right to observe about Plyer. That is, again, these are decisions, both Plyer and Wong Kim Ark, on point but not dispositive. Let's just get it done. And the Supreme Court doesn't issue advisory opinions. He teed it up so that they would. You think they will? I mean, take it up?
Almost certainly. They've already had a challenge from the ACLU. But I was going to say that, Hugh, so my understanding you correctly, it would require a constitutional amendment to change the status.
Yes.
Okay. All right. If the Supreme Court comes out and says that, then I think that there would be a significant push to do this. And here's my next question: could you then say, I imagine the U.S. federal law?
We're hard out, Jim. God love you. Have a great weekend. Go Jets.
See you Friday, Hugh.
Tarzana Joe, the poet laureate of the Hugh Hewitt Show. Hello, Joe.
Hello, Hugh. I just have a short observation today, but it is in the form of poetry. The world is changing faster than the changes I recall, so much so I've concluded that it hasn't changed at all. The feelings now expressed by every plutocrat and minion reflect what's always been the clear majority opinion. Nobody cheered inflation or censorship of words or wanted wheezy windmills killing whales and birds. We didn't vote for lawfare or insects making meat or seeing soldiers fleeing in disorderly retreat. There's always been consensus, expressed from town to town. If spy balloons come floating by, they ought to be shot down. The goal should be equality in every institution. The courts should be for justice and not for retribution. And while we love the planet, the Green Deal is a scheme. Title IX is crystal clear, and 9 months is extreme. You say there have been great changes, and I say, friend, not really. Most people who believe these things are now just speaking freely. That's Changes by Tarzana Joe.
That's brilliant, Joe. That will be we got lots of new listeners, right? New audience. TarzanaJoe.com. For how many years have we been doing this, Joe, on Friday?
Oh, a lot. How long have you been on the air?
25 years.
We've been doing Friday, I think, 15 plus years, right?
Oh, I think we're over 20. But it's all of them are collected at TarzanaJoe.com, as well as 2 collections of fine poetry. And Joe is a poet for hire, a hired rhymer. If you need a poem for going away party, a wedding, a salute, an anniversary, just send Joe a note. There's a button at his website, TarzanaJoe.com. Need a poem? Or you can write him at TarzanaJoe@Reagan.com. Joe, I love that poem. I got one question. What's all this stuff about insects making meat?
You don't know that's a big push, that you're going to be eating protein made of cockroaches? Come on.
I missed that one, Joe. So, okay, well, I'll go back and research it. TarzanaJoe@Reagan.com or go to TarzanaJoe.com. Thank you. Coming up, the Hillsdale Dialogue. I'm going back to the Republic with Dr. Larry Arnn, Dr. Daniel O'Toole. This is the penultimate episode in our long series on the Republic by Plato. Timely, as we consider how best to have justice in the United States and what the perfect regime looks like. The old books open up new questions and new perspectives. That's why we do the Hillsdale Dialogue with Dr. Larry Arnn. All things Hillsdale at hillsdale.edu every week. And some weeks, one of his colleagues at Hillsdale. This week, Professor O'Toole. All the Hillsdale Dialogues are collected at hugh4hillsdale.com. And if you want to hear what Garrity had to say off air, go over to the YouTube channel and click on it. It will be there by the close of business.